Melissa, why don't you just give yourself an introduction and let the listeners know who you are, and then we'll get into attachment theory and relationships and all kinds of good stuff after that.
For sure. So my name is Melissa Baisi, like as mentioned, and I'm a registered psychologist who has a special interest in Neville Goddard and all things law of assumption and manifesting. So I'm working to bring that more into my practice, and this is why I was hoping to do a YouTube video with you so that we could just get right into it.
I love it. I love it. Now, you said you were interested in the law of assumption. So, what is the main thing that interests you with the law of assumption, and what it means to you, and how you might want to use it in your practice and your coaching?
So do you mean the difference between law of assumption and law of
You know
attraction?
what? We can talk about that because a lot of people don't understand the difference or really think much about the difference. So, what is I guess I'll start by that. What is the law of
Yeah.
assumption to you? And then we can talk about how it's related to law of attraction.
Yeah, so I think the law of assumption really boils down to us being the sole creator in our reality versus the law of attraction. It talks about more co-creation with people, and everybody has their own free will, which then really limits us in how we can manifest people showing up differently in our reality. What do you think the difference is? How does that resonate for you?
I love that. I resonate with that really well. The law of assumption to me is just really feeling into, as Neville says, feeling into this state that we can create, and we don't have to live in this state of victimhood or this state. But it's tough, and that's why I'm so interested to talk to you about relationships, because people really are interested in how do I feel into these states that I'm looking for with my partner, or they made me feel like so bad, or they made me feel like this, or I feel I'm so in love, and so there's all these feelings, right, that's connected with relationships, and that's why I love what you're doing, is connecting this Neville Goddard concept of of the law of assumption, and feeling is the secret, and so what would you say to people that are maybe not being able to control their emotions, or wanting to feel their way into this, being able to create a great relationship with another person, for example?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. That's what gets in the way for most people is they're not able to maintain that end state, the state of the wish fulfilled. Um, so what's going to be really important is to regulate the nervous system. And I think that in these areas of psychology, they're really, really important because our neural pathways get wired into doing something a certain way if we've done it again and again and again and again. So to expect that we can all of a sudden just move into the state of the wish fulfilled and move into living in the end without doing some of the underlying psychological work, that's going to be really hard to do. And so what's required is that we go in there and dig up the old stuff and look at what it meant to us, what belief systems it created, and become mindfully aware of that program running in us all day, every day in our current day situation. Does that make sense?
So when I look at that area of my life, and I say, what are your beliefs, Joey, in this area of your life? And I like to start out with an I am statement, right? Because your I am is basically your belief system, right? So I am an awesome partner. This is what I feel. This is what I think is true. And so what do you do with your clients to kind of establish that baseline of their belief system, and then maybe say, is this a belief that is serving you or not? And so on and so on.
Yeah, so I would probably set out a few affirmations that would be ideal states for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say the affirmations to them and I'd say, so where do you disagree with this?
Mm.
Where does this not feel resonant for you? And then they'd probably get into a story about when they were younger or a past relationship where this, and that happened. Awesome. What does that mean to you? What belief did that create inside of you? And that's what we really need to work on because oftentimes these beliefs aren't logical and they're not really in line with self love. And I think self love is the basis and the premise for any kind of manifesting. So,
Absolutely.
correcting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, what do you say? Um, when somebody comes to you and they're kind of how do you bring it back, because no one wants to say you created this, right? And like you so how are you, I mean, you have to show a lot of compassion as a coach, as a therapist, and so I know that's touchy to say, and it's not that you did anything wrong, like you're perfect, and but kind of how do you lead with that to say, this is how it's been, but that doesn't mean that this is how it has to be moving forward, because you actually do have the ability to create, and you were creating it probably just unconsciously.
So what I usually do, there's a couple things that need to happen there. So if people are feeling like I got myself into this and they start blaming themselves for it, then what we need to have a conversation around how we don't do this kind of stuff consciously. We do the best that we can with what we've got at the time. So it's not your fault that you created this thing that you created. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then to turn it around to build faith in a manifestation, I always get people to do manifestation lists. So I have them manifest 5 new things a day, small things, little things, like the typical things you hear in the community, like a cup of coffee or whatever,
Right.
and start building it that way. Also, so start building it in the small ways, but then don't just stop there. Move into more medium-sized manifestations. So maybe you're not trying to manifest your SP right away because you don't have belief in the law yet, but maybe you have kind of a touchy friendship or a touchy family relationship that would be a little bit easier to iron out. Get them to iron that one out first and get the belief up strong, because faith is what is the engine of manifesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think starting with the smaller things makes it more, accessible, makes it more, they feel like, oh, if I can do this, then I can do, like even greater things. So, yeah, climb the ladder. You will not climb a ladder. Neville Goddard. Yes.
Yeah.
You talked about nervous system. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we've got to get the person to regulate their nervous system. We've got to get them in a more calm and peaceful state more of the time, that rather than an anxious or a depressed state. So
Okay.
the nervous system is going to be in one of those 3 areas. So up top by the throat, basically we have a long nerve called the vagus nerve that starts at the base of our brain and goes down to the base of our spine. And when the vagus nerve is activated around the throat area, we're going to be more calm and peaceful. When it's activated more in the chest area, we're going to be more anxious. And when it's activated at the base of the spine, we're going to be feeling down, depressed, low, any of those things. So basically what we're trying to do is get that nervous system regulation, get it up, activated around the throat area as much as possible. And that doesn't mean you have to stay there 100% of the time, but it does mean that you have to get quicker and more efficient at bringing it up and out of the other states when you find yourself there. So just finding yourself there less or finding yourself there for shorter periods of time is progress, and that will get you to your manifestation. I've manifested things where I've probably only had about 30-40% belief.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. How do you make someone aware of when they're where they are in that progression?
So I get them to feel into their bodies, feel
Okay.
the physical sensations
Mm.
of what's going on. And oftentimes the body, through its physical sensations, is going to give us so much data and information around what's going on, why it's happening, earlier memories that are being triggered. That all comes from the physical body.
I love that. I love that. I'm so into right now the mind body connection, and how it's just everything from sickness to healing, all wrapped in one, right? And the energy that we all, just the energy of that. So having that be really the baseline of regulating that is so powerful, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for people that might not know these different types of trauma responses, maybe you could just go over them a little bit.
So there's, like you said, fight, flight, freeze, and fawning. So fight or flight happens in the mid chest area, like we were talking about, in that anxious fight or flight
Mm-hmm.
area. And the freeze and the fawning happen a little lower. Fawning happens between the two areas, so between the chest area and the base of the spine area, because it employs both nervous system reactions.
Okay.
So when you're fawning, you're doing it out of a fear that a person will reject you, but also a freezing state of not knowing what else to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And then freeze is just the base of the spine. It's called the dorsal activation. So that it's that depressed area.
And what do you find, like, from a childhood trauma that usually comes up later, like, if you're one to avoid conflict or be more aggressive, or is there anything in relation to the type of trauma you had as a child that will relate to more of the way you act, like with those types of, fight or flight or fawn or freeze, for example?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we've had parents that are dismissive of our needs, then we are probably going to default to that freeze response. That's going to be at the base of our spine, activation response in the nervous system. And it's called an avoidant attachment style. If we've had a parent who is sometimes there for us, but sometimes not there for us, then we are going to probably have an anxious attachment style. And a lot of our reactions to life are going to be from that mid-chest area. It's called the sympathetic activation, that anxious activation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
But when people are coming in because they have attachment style issues, then what we want to do is really begin to understand their attachment style, understand their relationship with their parents back when they were a child and even today, and see how their relationship with their parents impacted their relationship to self, and then how their relationship to self is impacting all of their current day relationships.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, do you think people suppress that, like what actually happened to them in childhood? And so that, are you able to always even tap into that? I mean, I know the guided imagery, if you can get them in that space, I mean, I know I've gone through some things in my own practice with it where I was like, oh, I didn't know that was going to come up, like in my imagination. And I mean, that's one reason I started this channel, was just to find out the immensity of what you can find within your own imagination when you just start to quiet the mind. And because when we're like, even when I'm talking to you as a therapist, I'm kind of still like a little in, like, on a higher beta state of talking, and you could be asking me, Joey, what happened as a child, and I could still not really feel that ability to go there, but that's one thing I found was when I was able to relax into that, it was just much more like this calming that allowed my imagination to expand and just be it was so freeing to just like say, oh, here's this little girl, like this is her, and she's she's just sitting there playing on the ground, and it was just so cool because your imagination just comes to life when you just give yourself that a little bit of just switching that brainwave state just a little bit, to go into that creative mode. And it's just fascinating to me to be able to do that. But a great therapist has that calming, compassionate effect to be able to do that, even if somebody has their eyes open. So I'm sure, everybody has different methods and modalities to reach a person. What's a couple tools that I can take to really start believing in myself and believing in this story of creating my own reality and believing that, I can heal from whatever trauma I've been going through in a relationship or whatever?
So that would be not so much tools that they take away. I mean, I'd have them journal and definitely get their thoughts out on a daily basis just to kind of empty that out and not have them walking around with a bunch of stories in their head all day. So journaling is a huge tool, but in terms of going in and doing the healing work, we'd probably do that in session. We'd probably use inner child work, or I'm not sure if you're familiar with internal family systems, parts work.
A little bit. I mean, even in guided imagery, I learned parts work and the different parts of you and inner child and things like that. But maybe you could just give a brief summary of what that is for people
So
that don't know?
internal families, yeah, for sure. Internal family systems is the gold standard of trauma treatment right now. It is when we go inward using the physical body to feel into the physical sensations, we identify those different physical parts inside of us. So maybe a tight chest or nausea in the stomach or tight shoulders. And we go and work with that part and interact with that part to hear what that part is carrying and what it's struggling with, and then we support that part. So we don't try to tell it it's okay, you'll be fine. We don't do any of that. We instead say, tell me more. And we get the
Mm-hmm.
part talking, so that the part starts really opening up about, okay, here's what's wrong, here's where it all started, here's where it gets worse when you do this, this, and this throughout the day. It's so amazing the information
Mm.
that we can get from our various different parts.
Yeah.
So that's how I would go in and work on healing trauma, is teaching people how to befriend all of their parts, even the ones that are loud and annoying and say mean things. There is no bad part inside of us. All of our parts are just trying to help us in the way they know how. And they don't necessarily know the best ways how, because they have kind of maladaptive ways of dealing with things. So we need to take the reins and teach our parts that they're safe, they can trust us, we will have their back, and then they can move into a more healed state.
I love that. Yeah, that goes right in line with some of the things I was learning with guided imagery, because it's like you can even go in and make compromises with these other parts of yourself, right? So there's always a part of you that, say, wants to quit smoking, but there's obviously a part of you that is getting something out of it, right? Like you're not doing it to hurt yourself. You're doing it because it is relieving something in you or you enjoy it. But there's another part of you that wants to quit. So you go in, and is this kind of what is similar? You go in and you can talk to and make certain compromises with this side of you, and in a loving and kind way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so
See, no,
powerful. It's so powerful.
it's so powerful. It's so healing. It
Hmm.
really can get to the deepest of traumas.
So I see where you're really making the connections of your practice with imagination and Neville Goddard and when did you first learn about Neville?
I think like 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2018, 2019. How about you?
You know, it was when I was learning guided imagery. I'd say like 4 years ago, maybe. And I don't know which came first. I actually don't. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is all the same. And I was having so many amazing experiences, like with imagination and guided imagery. And I just started diving into Neville. And I honestly can't remember which I did first, but
Yeah.
it just was all kind of at the same time, where I was like, oh my God, the subconscious mind is so powerful, and we're just so automated. Our behavior is just so automated. We're just doing the same things 99% of the time, day after day after day. And wait, I don't have to, we don't have to do that. Like we can say, are these beliefs still serving me? And if they're not, we can change them. We can change them with the power of the subconscious mind. And what I learned was, like, if you just say, oh, I am great, I am this, I am that, and you say it on the conscious level, you're not going to believe it. But if you can dive into the subconscious mind and see it and feel it on a different level with your inner, with the light within you that's telling you that is already perfect and whole and complete, if you can tap into that, then it will start to manifest in your outer world. And so that's why, I really started the meditations, is because it's one thing just to talk, like, yes, I can affirm this, but you can go straight to the source. It's like you go straight to the source of the subconscious mind. And I mean, just absolutely amazing things can happen that you would never know was within you.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I wanted to ask you about manifestation, because the way I see it, and I wanted to see what your thoughts on it, is Neville Goddard, and not just Neville Goddard, but Neville Goddard talks about how creation is finished, right? I mean, he uses the Bible a lot for reference back in his time. It was just a way for him to really, explain it to people. But the idea that creation is finished. And what I like to tell people is, when you manifest, you're not creating, you're actually just bringing about the perfection and the creations that are already there waiting for you. I mean, you think about like the greatest inventors and everything. They either were they had a dream and it came to them, or they were near sleep and it came to them. And it wasn't like, it just, they were able to bring it out of the already finished creation and manifest it into their reality. So, and I think that makes it more plausible to people to think, oh, I'm not creating this out of thin air, right? It's like, no, there's already this God or this light or whatever, this perfect creation within me. And all I have to do is open the door and tap into it, knock, and the door will be open, right? Just tap into it. But you have to give it attention. You have to say, wait, I want to tap into this, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So I believe in timeline shifting and parallel realities. So every possible state that we could ever imagine is finished. And it's up to us with our focus and our imagination to shift into the timeline that we want to be a part of. And where we're focusing the most is where we are going to find ourselves. Our 3D is always going to reflect our focus. So I 100% am on board with what you're saying, creation is finished. And I think that that's another principle of law of assumption as well, is that creation is finished. We're not creating brand new things out of thin air, which I think law of attraction is more on board with, that we're creating things out of thin air. What do you say?
Yeah, I think it just gets it's just been so overhyped. I think it's convoluted and confusing. I mean, I think there's a law of attraction has a lot of good to it. But I just think there's so many people talking about it and teaching it that it's become very more external, materialized, and something from outside. And like you said, it's creating out here instead of this inner knowing, this inner assumption, this inner. Yeah. So, but not to downplay or talk bad about law of assumption. I think it has its place and it's done some great work. People have done great work with it. But yeah, so I guess where do you start with just somebody that comes to you and says, how do I manifest my special person, right? How do I want it now? And I think that might lie in part of the answer is this when you try, that's like the worst thing, right?
Yeah, that's coming from a place of lack, and so they're just going to continue to experience more lack. So the first thing, if they're saying things like I want it now, then we would have to learn strategies in how to create that now for ourselves. And so that's through different techniques like scripting, inner conversations, affirmations. All the manifesting techniques really can help us get into that end state and stay there.
But do you find that when you can kind of get to an understanding of someone's trauma and then they become aware of their trauma, that in of itself, that awareness can really just move mountains, just that awareness?
For sure. And I think that we attract people based on our unhealed traumas. And so if we have a bunch of unhealed traumas and we have an SP and we go to manifest that SP back, we're going to be working through some of those traumas. So that specific person might not be as attractive once those traumas are healed.
Oh, that's interesting.
They probably won't be as attractive because it was really their trauma and your trauma that were attracted to each other.
Yeah, I have someone that calls that womb mates. They're womb mates.
Yeah. Nice.
Wound mates. Yeah. Yeah, they're sharing in each other's trauma. That's so common, right? That codependency kind of behavior.
Yeah, and it's all on a subconscious level too. And it may or may not be codependent in how their traumas meet up. It might be hyper independence of how the traumas meet up. But the first thing we need to do when manifesting a specific person is heal the traumas. And, a lot of people probably aren't going to want to hear this, but you might not want your SP after it all is said and done.
That's amazing. Yeah, people probably don't want to hear that. That's like me giving up sugar and then realizing I go back to it and it doesn't taste the same anymore. because I haven't eaten.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wow, I didn't want to give up sugar, and then you go on this high fat diet for a long time, like 30 days, and then you go and you taste the sugar, and you're like, I don't even want that anymore. It's pretty
Hmm.
amazing that you actually literally change biologically.
Yeah. But the cool thing is you can always manifest. So if you're not really wanting your specific person anymore, but you're still wanting to want them, then you can manifest a version of you that still wants them, and you can manifest a version of them that's in their healed state. It's just a lot of work.
Hmm.
And so it's just like you could do all of that work, or you could just manifest a new person who matches your new healed state and you have just as much chemistry with.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are people
So it can
open
go
to
up
that?
any way.
Do people feel
Or
open to that?
for sure, because it
Yeah.
still leaves them the option to manifest the old person if they want to. They absolutely can. That is not outside the realm of possibility at all. I believe that you can manifest literally anything you want in this world. So you can manifest whatever you want. Just be aware that what you want might change. So you might have to change parts of you. Yeah, it can get a little bit confusing.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and we feel like we're on this linear timeline, so it's talk more about that for a minute if you can, with what you believe in terms of the timelines and the shifting of reality. Just you were starting to talk about that. I just wanted to hear more your thoughts on
Mm.
that.
Well, I guess all time is happening at once.
Mm,
And so shifting into different alternate realities on the timeline, when and where it happens doesn't really matter. But to us, in our linear thinking, it does matter. So we can increase how quickly a manifestation comes to us based on how deeply and saturated we are in the wish fulfilled. And if we are staying in that end state and we are faithful to that end state, we will get what we want. Like I said earlier, I've manifested at like 30-40% belief. Those manifestations don't typically come through very fast. But if you can get your belief up to like 80-90%, those manifestations come through really fast.
when you're working with somebody, how much time do you spend in their past as opposed to in their now and then in their future? Because I know that a lot of therapy says, okay, we got to go, revise, and even Neville talks about revision. And so how much do you put credence on the past, and or just say, hey, like, let's live in the now. This is where we are. We don't have to fix all your, like, we don't have to, always go back way back. Like, we can deal with the now. So what are your thoughts on that?
It really just depends on the client and what needs to be worked through. If they have a ton of unhealed trauma and they haven't really talked about their past, then we do have to dig into it.
Okay.
Um, what I'm starting to learn too, as I'm going on my 8th year of being a psychologist, is even when people seem super stuck in the past and they can't get off of it, I will oftentimes try to bring them into the present, remind them of their creative power. But if they keep going back to the past, it's because we haven't done enough healing work. We haven't done enough parts work around what is still remnant there. So I think going back into the past, I think that Neville would disagree with me on this, but going back into the past is super important and super helpful in clearing it.
It seems like a lot of relationship issues, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it comes down to a true lack of communication among the partners, right? Among the two people. And what are your thoughts on like some of these newer forms of therapy, like using psychedelics or using something like EMDA, like the ecstasy? I know I have a friend that was married, this was years ago, and they just couldn't communicate. They couldn't really, they were very different personality wise, and one was like radical honesty and did some like landmark stuff and was like, let's just talk it out, and like, and she was just not able to do that as easily, and it was, and so they did some ecstasy together, and then before they did it very like in a way where they wrote down questions that they wanted to ask each other and just have this ability. And anyway, so they were able to get to a place of true just loving kindness and honesty, and ask their questions and talk to each other. And I guess they had just a beautiful moment together. And at the end, they said, you know what? We don't need to be married anymore. Like, they just realized lovingly that it wasn't working. And they were able to communicate that with each other in that kind of environment. And I'm not saying that's for everyone or by any means, but do you have any thoughts on some of these new type of methods of using that for even like psychedelics, or I know like Gabor Mate was talking about, ayahuasca and things like that, just for different healing modalities in general?
I don't know. I personally I don't have any experience with doing it with clients, with doing it myself. So like back in my teenage years, I did dabble in a little bit of ecstasy. Um, and I can't, to be honest, I can't imagine bringing that into my adulthood. Like, I just can't. I believe there's tons of research and data that's coming out saying that this is very helpful. So I believe the research and data. But just from my own personal experience, I've never done psychedelics. Those kind of scare me.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And then in terms of bringing ecstasy into my adult life, it just seems a little, I can't imagine how that would be therapeutic.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's not for everyone, and
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm a very open person, so what people want to do is, and
Mhm.
again, what is the science saying is important as well. So if we can communicate and look into each other's eyes and have that communication without needing drugs to do it or any.
Yes. And so this is where I would say nervous system regulation and doing parts work really comes in handy. Teaching people how to regulate their nervous system by doing parts work is so incredibly powerful. That's why I would hate to muddy it up with some sort of drug, because it's all very doable without. But again, the research and the data are showing that it's helpful in cases, so I'm not disputing that at all. But just in my own personal practice, parts work is so powerful. It regulates
Yeah.
the nervous
Well, and
system.
if we just realize that there's not a quick fix, like we want a drug to fix something, we just want the quick fix because our attentions are so limited nowadays. And to say, hey, you know what? If you want to make this relationship work, or you want the relationship of your dreams, then you got to go to work in here, and it might take some time and do the work and
Yeah.
commit to that. Then that's when true change is going to happen. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would
As a
totally
coach?
agree with that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
super important to do that inner work. And I don't think there's a lot of shortcuts for that. You just have to get in there and do it.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sure it takes, like you said, how long, what's like your general, and I know you're kind of, and tell more people about what you're doing, because I know you're a licensed psychologist, but you're kind of gearing more into coaching.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know those are very similar, but what would you say is the difference? And then just kind of give a general overview of how you're kind of setting up your new coaching style.
Yeah, so as just I was noticing that it was taking a lot longer with people, and I knew that there was a more streamlined approach. And so that's why I'm going into coaching, is because with psychology, I'll see people for years. And most people are not wanting to spend years on themselves. They end up like liking the process of being my client and me as their therapist, so we just continue to meet. But it's more of an exploration. It's not as focused, it's not as goal oriented in terms of like, I want to manifest my SP and I want to manifest my SP within this amount of time.
Okay.
we there's a bunch of exploration, a lot of ups and downs. We can take different what's called trailheads and go different directions, and they eventually get there, but not very quickly. So I created a program. It's an 8-week course, and it streamlines the process. It teaches people about their attachment style, how to regulate their nervous system, and then how to manifest whatever it is they're trying to manifest. And I'm just finding that this approach is a lot more, oh, what's that word? Um, Potent. So
Okay. Gets right to the heart of it.
It does. It just gets
Yeah.
right to it. And it's for people who are like, yeah, I don't want to spend years in therapy. I just want my outcome. What do you have for me? And I've got this amazing course that is going to get people their outcome.
That sounds like exactly what we were talking about at the beginning, where you just go right to the subconscious mind instead of
Yeah.
like staying on the surface of, I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy has its place, but when you're just talking about your problems, instead, I'm not saying that's what you were doing, but when you can go to this deeper level, you can just get so much more, accomplished in such less time because it just goes right to the source, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what your program sounds like it's doing. So is that 8 weeks? Is that working with you, or is it a course and then they get access to you a little bit, or?
Yeah, they would have access to me, and it's a course where they're going to have hours and hours of me weekly. So
Okay.
yeah, so the access to me isn't really as important. It's the outcome, and it's for people who are really looking for their outcome. Like I'm trying to manifest my SP or a new person, and I want to do it quickly. I'm on a time crunch for whatever reason, or I'm trying to manifest a certain amount of money, or I'm trying to manifest a certain job. And that's what this is really for, is just like a potent route to manifesting whatever it is that they're looking for.
I love it. I love it. I've enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you maybe want to just touch on before we wrap things up?
I feel like we covered so much today. We were talking about timeline shifting and relationships, and like we covered a lot. If people want to find me, they can go to attachmentrecovery.com, and that is currently my name on Instagram and YouTube, Attachment Recovery. But I can't promise that's going to stay my name. But attachmentrecovery.com is the best way to find me, I would say.
All right, I'll put any information down in the description too for people to get hold of
For
you.
sure.
All right,
Yeah.
Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you today, Joey.